She thought the worst was over, the hours of labor, the pain, the blood. When the midwife finally said, "Push one last time," Amber Hayes believed she was minutes away from hearing her baby's first cry. But the cry never came, and that silence, that terrible silence, was the sound that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She screamed. The midwife panicked. Someone called 911. By the time help arrived, the baby was gone, and so was her future. They told her it was just a routine investigation, but Amber wasn't allowed to hold her baby. She wasn't allowed to leave, and when a man in a suit sat across from her with a clipboard, he didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He asked, "Did you try to hurt the baby? Were you alone during the birth? Do you have a history of mental illness?" Amber was in shock, bleeding, weak, alone, but by morning, she wasn't just a mother who lost her baby. She was a suspect in a murder. Amber hadn't even left the hospital when she was charged with criminally negligent homicide. They didn't wait for the autopsy. They didn't review the complications from her home birth. They didn't ask about her prenatal care, or lack thereof. They saw a young, black, single woman who gave birth alone, and they called it murder. Amber had begged for help weeks earlier. She'd called clinics, tried to find a doula, but she had no insurance, and no one returned her calls. So when labor came early, she did what any desperate mother would do. She prayed, and she delivered her child in silence. But silence is dangerous in this system. Before she even stepped into court, the public had made up its mind. Why was she alone? Where was the father? What kind of woman gives birth like that? No one asked. Why didn't she have access to care? Why was her pain ignored? Why are poor mothers criminalized for being poor? They didn't see a grieving mother. They saw a statistic, and the system doesn't mourn statistics. Amber's trial began 8 months later, but it wasn't a trial about truth. It was a performance. The prosecutor stood tall and confident, telling the jury this was a preventable death, that Amber chose to give birth alone, that she made reckless decisions that cost a life. Her public defender barely spoke. He didn't call a medical expert. He didn't challenge the police report. He didn't even allow Amber to testify in her own defense. And when the medical examiner quietly admitted that the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, no one blinked, because they had already decided a mother who gave birth alone must have something to hide. Amber Hayes was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the death of her own child. No motive, no physical evidence of abuse, just assumptions, just fear, just the silence of a woman the world refused to understand. They didn't give her therapy. They didn't give her time to grieve. They gave her a number, a prison ID, and they called it justice. 6 months after Amber was sentenced, a nurse from the local women's shelter wrote a letter. She remembered Amber. She remembered the day Amber showed up barefoot, pregnant, bleeding, asking for help. But the shelter was full. They turned her away. They wrote her name in a logbook, and forgot. Until that letter, I never knew what happened to her. I thought about her for months. I think the court needs to know she tried. Amber had tried, again and again, but the jury never heard that. Her own lawyer never asked, because in the system she was in poverty isn't evidence. His name was Micah, and for months, Amber wasn't allowed to say it. She was told not to speak about him in prison, told not to write his name in letters, told not to dwell on the past. But he was her son, he was real, and he was loved. No matter what the court decided, Amber never stopped being his mother. Not when the world called her a killer, not when they caged her, not when they forgot her. She remembered every single day. Amber began to study, not for a degree, not for parole, but to understand why no one ever stood up for her. She read about other women, black mothers, brown mothers, poor women, women who lost babies and were punished instead of protected. If she had been white, if she had insurance, if she'd had a lawyer who cared, Amber wasn't a monster. She wasn't reckless. She was unseen. And in this system, if they don't see you as a mother, they will only see you as a threat. Amber started writing to journalists, to advocacy groups, to anyone who would listen. Most never responded, but one day someone did. A lawyer in Chicago, who specialized in wrongful convictions of women in childbirth-related deaths, read her file and something didn't add up. He said, "You were convicted because you were alone, not because you did anything wrong." And with that, a motion was filed. 3 years, 5 months, and 12 days after she was imprisoned, Amber Hayes walked back into court. This time, her new attorney stood beside her, prepared, relentless, ready to fight. They presented everything the jury never saw: the shelter logbook, the nurse's testimony, medical reports that showed no trauma, the missing expert opinion. The judge didn't apologize. The prosecutor didn't blink, but the conviction was vacated. Amber didn't cry. She just looked down and whispered, "He would been for today." Amber was free, but the world didn't celebrate her. There was no press conference, no headline, no apology, because in America, when a mother is wrongly imprisoned they whisper it, but when she is accused they scream. Amber now works in silence. She helps other mothers, she writes letters, she testifies in courtrooms that once ignored her, because no one can give her son back. But maybe she can stop the next mother from losing hers. In the U.S., over 100 women a year are prosecuted after experiencing stillbirths or pregnancy loss, most of them poor or women of color. Many of them are still serving time. Amber's story is real. Her name has been changed to protect her privacy, but her pain is shared by many. Grief is not a crime, but in this system sometimes it is treated like one.